Nicky opened her eyes as the first ray of sunshine fell in through her window and hit her face. For a moment she felt calm, until the memories of last night hit her again. Mom and Dad, angry and disappointed. Her, trying to tell them what had really happened, but not getting through to either of them. She felt a tear in her eye and blinked it away as she turned her head and rested her cheek on the soft pillow. It was unfair, Nicky thought. Every time something happened, she got the blame. It didn't matter if it was her fault or not. Her parents seemed more concerned with trying to find a way to make her responsible than actually help her. Why couldn't they just take her side for once? Or if that was too hard, let her be? She felt a sob coming up and turned her head further until her face was in the pillow. They mustn't hear her, she told herself. Nicky felt more tears in her eyes as the first quiet sob came out of her. Why couldn't the world be fair for once? How would they like it if she treated them this way? Always assuming the worst, never believing them, blaming them for anything and everything. She wanted to scream, but knew that her pillow wouldn't manage to muffle a full-on shout, so she kept her mouth shut. Just 2 more years, Nicky promised herself in her mind. 2 years. Then she would be legally allowed to leave here, and neither Mom nor Dad would be able to stop her. They would never see her again. She remembered their angry voices from last night, Dad's exhausted tone while Mom had glared at her. She had told them that she wished they would just disappear and leave her alone, which probably wasn't the nicest thing to say. But she had wanted them to understand how she felt, how much pressure she was under. Nicky turned her head, blinked, and suddenly felt a cold chill. The sun was up already. It was Thursday. Why had no one come and woken her up? She turned her body to the other side and picked up her phone. 8:30. School had started already. With a hiss and a curse, Nicky jumped out of bed and landed on a small plush carpet. Why had no one come for her? Was that a new way of punishing her? Making her miss school? She felt this anger welling up inside of her again. That was definitely Mum's doing. Only she would come up with something like that. Nicky felt wide awake, unlocked the door and ripped it open, then stepped out into the hallway. The whole apartment was quiet. Deathly so. She looked around. Her parents' bedroom door was slightly ajar, as was the entrance to the bathroom. This felt strange, she thought. Yeah, Mum and Dad had to go to work, but normally at least one of them only left after around 9 a.m. But not today. They were both gone. She couldn't hear anyone in the living room, nor was the TV running. No one was in the kitchen, washing up or walking around, picking up stuff. Nicky took another step and listened closely. She couldn't hear the neighbors either. There was also no noise coming from the street below. It was 8:30 on a weekday. She should be able to hear cars driving by. This cold chill she had felt when she had woken up came back to her. Something was off about it all. Nicky walked on and into the living room. It was empty, just as she had thought. The TV was off. There was no cup of coffee or anything on the tiny end table, or even the big one where they normally had breakfast. Everything was clean and empty. Nicky looked around again, walked into the kitchen and found that place completely clean as well. Was this a joke? Had her parents quickly washed up this morning and left without making a noise? Did Mom want to teach her something? Nicky felt the anger again, but it immediately dissipated. No, Mom wouldn't do it like that, right? She'd never go about something in such a roundabout way. Nicky stepped out of the kitchen and walked through the whole apartment once more. It was already 9 o'clock by now. Should she even go to school? With a groan, she turned around and walked into the bathroom, brushed her teeth, and then quickly got dressed. She should at least try, right? Mom couldn't get angry at her if she at least made a conscious effort. Nicky grabbed her backpack, put on her shoes and jacket, and left the apartment behind. After the first step, she suddenly stopped. Something wasn't right here either. The hallway outside the door was just as quiet as her home had been. She listened closely, but couldn't hear a single person in the complex talking, shouting, or singing. No TVs, no cars, not even animals. The neighbor 2 doors down had this small dog that usually barked and howled pretty much throughout the day. But right now, even he was quiet. Nicky took another step, then one more. No one was here. She was completely alone. This was the first time that thought entered her mind, and it almost frightened her. What could have happened here? Had she missed some kind of evacuation order? Nicky swallowed hard as she thought those words. But Mom and Dad would have woken her up. This wasn't the time for jokes. She felt her heart racing and started to run. Her footfalls echoed around her, while she turned away from the elevator and began sprinting down the stairs. There really was no one here, not a single person beside her. She hopped down the flight of stairs, one after another. All the doors to the apartments were closed. There was no sign of anyone having been here all morning. Nicky reached the first floor and ran toward the entrance of the building. She could see the sun shining outside through the glass door. It looked peaceful. In a single motion, she pulled the door open and almost stumbled as she finally managed to get out of the building. The street was quiet, as were the other apartment complexes around the area. Not a single person could be heard. Not even a vehicle. Cars were parked by the side of the road, but no one was on it. She closed her eyes to concentrate on the sounds surrounding her. The only thing she could hear was the wind blowing through the empty streets. Nicky felt the same chill again, pulled her jacket tighter, and turned around. The whole area was dead. She could feel tears welling up in her eyes, took out her phone to call someone. But the second she saw the screen, she knew it would be pointless. No reception. None at all. Nicky turned around ever faster. What should she do? Where had they gone? She could feel her heart racing and the air not getting fully into her lungs. If they had been evacuated because of some coming catastrophe, then where were they? How should she follow them and reach a safe place if she didn't even know where she should go? Nicky could feel herself hyperventilating and forced her feet to stop for a moment. The world kept spinning around her. What if it was an earthquake? She would need to get as far away from the buildings as possible. Or a tsunami? Then she would have to stay away from the waterline. A meteor strike? A hurricane? She had no idea what was coming, so how should she protect herself? Tears were welling up in her eyes as she continued breathing like someone running a marathon, without even moving her feet. Nicky felt her legs turning to rubber and fell to her knees. Why hadn't Mom or Dad woken her up? Did they really not love her anymore? Was that it? Had they heard the evacuation order and seen it as a chance? A way for them to get rid of her? She felt sick to her stomach. Where should she go? What should she do? She needed a safe place, somewhere where she could survive, even if she was alone. The school. An idea appeared in her mind, and suddenly Nicky managed to catch her breath for once. Yes, that was it. The school had one of those Cold War bunkers on the premises. She'd heard about it. If she managed to get in there, she would be safe. No matter what happened, people would look for her once the emergency was over. And a bunker like that could withstand flood or fire. Nicky nodded and forced herself to stand up again. Her legs were still wobbly, but at least now she had a plan, something to do, besides wait for the inevitable end. She looked around one last time, up to the windows of the apartment complex. For a split second, Nicky felt her chest tightening again. One of the curtains on the 4th floor moved, but there was no person there. Only a shadow. The wind, she told herself, and forced her mind to concentrate on what was truly important. How could she get to school with no bus and no car? Well, she would need to walk. There was no other way around it. Nicky shook her head and started jogging down the empty and abandoned road. All those cars standing at the curb seemed like the corpses of dead creatures to her. They had been left behind to die, just like her. But she would survive. There was no way in hell she'd just sit down and wait for the inevitable. No. Whatever Mom had planned, she would do her own thing, and then never, ever speak to either of her parents again. Nicky reached the first intersection, turned and started to jog along the path the bus would have taken. That was the easiest way not to get lost. It would take her at least half an hour to reach the school, she knew. But right now she felt determined enough to not let it bother her at all. Once there, she might even find other people. There had to be some who hadn't been able or willing to evacuate, right? Men and women who stayed behind for a myriad of reasons. A few of them would definitely look for the next best shelter in this city, which would be the school. At least, that was what her teacher had once told her, during the lessons on the Cold War. Nicky could feel a stinging pain in her side and realized that she had stopped breathing rhythmically those last few steps, but she didn't dare slow down. When would the disaster hit? Tomorrow? In a few hours? The next moment? She had no idea what was coming or what to look out for. Above her, the sky was still blue and almost clear, except for a few small clouds. That meant it couldn't be a hurricane, right? She was pretty sure that should be the case, but right now Nicky didn't dare make any definite assumptions. There were no birds or anything singing around the area either. Could that mean an earthquake was coming? A bad one? Did birds fall silent before it hit? She should have looked that up when she had the chance, Nicky chastised herself in her mind. If only she had been more interested in stuff like that. She could have read the signs and would already know what would happen next. But that didn't matter right now. She didn't, so she couldn't. So she had to continue with her plan. Just run along the lone and empty road until she hopefully reaches the school before the disaster strikes. Her foot almost missed a step as the stinging pain in her side got to be too much, and Nicky knew she had to stop. Sweat was running down her back, her legs were shaking, and she was completely out of breath. Even though part of her mind wanted to drive her on and told her to just start jogging again, she knew she wouldn't be able to make it to school like that. There was no way she would get there at this speed. She was completely exhausted already, and the stress and fear weren't helping much either. Nicky bent over, put her hands on her knees, and breathed in and out. Her whole body was aching, but she hadn't even run that far. Was it the stress? She could still feel the adrenaline in her veins, but her body was giving her unmistakable signs to take it slower. The uncertainty was killing her. If the disaster hit in a minute, nothing she would do would make a difference. If it were 3 hours, she could walk to the school at a leisurely pace and be fine. Not knowing which it was had made her panic and expend all this energy for nothing. Nicky cried out and heard her scream echo back from the empty buildings and along the street. It was torture. Did Mom know what was happening to her right now? Probably, Nicky thought with a tear in her eye. And she didn't care. Neither did Dad. He'd just gone along with her instead of staying by her side and protecting her like her father should. Both of them should have. The mere thought of them sickened her. Nicky looked up between the heavy breaths and suddenly saw something that gave her hope. There, leaning against one of the trees, she could see it. A bike. Someone had left it there. Nicky jogged over, grabbed its handle and moved it a bit. It wasn't even chained to the tree. The owner would definitely not miss it either. Once the catastrophe hit, the bike would have been swept away or buried under rubble anyway. Nicky pulled it along, got on and started riding it. She found the gap between the cars standing along the road and changed over from the sidewalk to the middle of the street. With no one else driving here, there was no danger, she told herself. Yet she couldn't shake this feeling that something was still off about the silence surrounding her. It felt strange. Even as she blew past the intersections and kept on riding, Nicky couldn't shake this feeling. Everyone had gone. There was no sign of anyone having stayed behind. She remembered videos of evacuations she had seen on the internet. A few people always refused to move or follow. But not here, no. She drove along the route the bus normally took and looked closely at the buildings around here. It didn't matter if they were shops, offices, or apartments. They all stood empty. From time to time, she could see curtains moving behind the windows. But any time she looked up, she found no one standing there. Were they hiding? Should she go up and knock on a few doors? No. If someone was there, they would have called out to her once they saw her riding by, right? At least one of them would have made a noise. She shook her head and steered the bike along the road. It didn't matter. There would be people at the school shelter. Maybe even someone she knew. They would help her. and answer her questions. Nicky blew through another intersection without seeing or hearing even a single car. The whole city seemed dead. Her worries, pushed down deep, were coming up again. What if it wasn't an evacuation? No, she shouldn't think like that. What other explanation could there be? Nicky turned at the next intersection and could see the school down the road. Her heart fluttered. She would be safe. She would reach her destination before the disaster could even strike. With a sigh, she stood up on the bike and started pedaling harder. Something she didn't miss was the lack of noise even here. At least for now, she still couldn't hear anyone, whether on the streets or on the school property. No, they had to be there. Maybe they were already hiding. Nicky could feel herself speeding up. The tires were almost flying over the asphalt as she looked around to see any sign of anyone having been here these past few hours. There was nothing. No sign at all. Nicky continued praying in her mind as she steered the bike toward the big lot where the school stood. Part of her already knew what she would see. She didn't want to admit it, but it was clear even before she could reach the big gate. That place was completely empty as well. Nicky jumped off the bike and let it fall as she rushed to the gate and looked inside. Everything from the lawn to the big building was empty and abandoned. There was no sign of anyone having been here. No trampled down grass, no windows that were open, not even a sign or anything like that warning people. What the hell was going on here? Had the authorities deemed the school's shelter not safe enough? That would mean the whole area was about to be wiped off the map, right? The cold chill she felt as she thought about it was worse than anything she'd experienced before. And her mom had left her behind. Nicky pulled out her phone and looked at it more closely. Still, no signal, no way of contacting anyone. She couldn't even leave behind a message. Once the catastrophe hit, she would be gone, as would any trace of her. No one would ever know where she had died, how or why. Nicky felt tears swimming in her eyes as her hands grabbed hold of the thick metal bars that the school's gate was made of. She tried to rattle them, but they didn't budge at all. Quiet sobs were coming out of her mouth and traveling through the abandoned streets. What should she do? What could she even do right now? Should she try to look for the keys to one of the cars? No, she wouldn't even manage to start one in all likelihood. And even if she did, the possibility of getting into an accident was far too great. She'd probably end up stuck somewhere even worse. No. What she could do, though, was get into the shelter inside the school. It would at least raise her chances of surviving a tiny bit. And if there was some kind of radio down there where she could listen to an emergency broadcast, she'd know what to expect. Nicky grabbed hold of the bars and started pulling herself up. The gate had spikes on top of it, but they weren't really that dangerous. Stuff like that was mostly meant to intimidate, she knew, and with no one around, she could pretty much take her time. At least until the catastrophe hit. Nicky found a foothold and pushed herself up even further. One hand reached the uppermost horizontal bar so she could pull her body up and managed to place one of her knees between two spikes. From here, she could see the whole lawn of the school building. It really was as empty and abandoned as she had feared. No, that didn't matter, she told herself. Nicky pulled off her backpack and placed it on the spikes so she wouldn't get caught on them, then swung herself over the top and slid down the inside of the gate. The noise of her hands on the metal bars echoed around the completely empty city. Her knees were weak as she finally touched the ground, then turned and looked at the building. Something was wrong with it, her mind warned her. It felt different. Dead almost. She had never before seen the school this quiet, this calm. Nicky wiped her palms on her pants as she set off and started to jog across the lawn. The sky above was still clear. There was no sign of any thunder on the horizon, and the wind was far too calm to turn into a storm in the next few hours. It was strange, she thought. Somehow, it felt like she could feel it far more intensely in here, where there were no giant buildings cutting off her line of sight immediately. The place felt dead, but the world around her seemed eerily calm, as if it wasn't just about to sink into chaos. Nicky felt a chill as she reached the wide flight of old stairs leading up to the school's entrance. The windows looking out in her direction were all dark, but something inside of her still warned her to stop her feet and check more closely, at least for a second. Nicky lifted her head just as someone moved behind one of the windows. This time, it wasn't a breeze blowing through a building and shifting the curtains. No, this time she had seen it. Nicky stared up and looked closely at the window. She thought she could see it, even through the reflection of the sky that almost made it opaque. She could make out the outlines of a figure. The hair on the nape of her neck started standing up. Parts of her didn't want to keep looking and screamed at her to lower her gaze. No, there wasn't someone watching her from the building, but something. Its cold, cruel eyes were staring out at her, measuring her up, and Nicky felt another chill. What should she do? The thing up there wasn't moving, so would it be safe to go inside? Nicky doubted it. Parts of her still pushed her on. It wasn't like she had any other choice, right? She needed to reach the shelter. Raising a foot, she wanted to take another step, but suddenly stopped as she could see movement, not just in the window above, but in every single glass pane facing her. She watched the one she had seen first. A finger appeared at the top left corner of the window, pressing its tip against the pane, then moving down at an angle. She could see dark, oily liquid sticking to the inside of the glass, and froze completely as she realized what all those things were doing. They were writing something. Nicky stumbled back a step as her eyes stayed glued to the sight in front of her. "You" was the first word. A cold chill gripped her heart, but the things didn't stop. "Asked." Another word appeared. The fingers in all the windows moved in perfect unison. She could see them dragging their tips and that black, oily liquid across the glass. "For." The message continued. Nicky took another step back. This place wasn't safe, her instincts warned her. Those things in there weren't friendly. She could feel it. The fingers continued moving, filling the empty space of the window in the bottom right corner. "This." The last word appeared in countless panes at once. Nicky felt like her blood was freezing as she looked at the full message. "You asked for this." "What?" she hissed, as her eyes shot from one corner of the building to the other. The message was in every single window. and behind it she could see those things staring out at her. She hadn't asked for this. No, she had... Disappear and leave me alone. That was what she had told her parents yesterday. No, that couldn't be it, right? The things in the windows, though, seemed to slowly shift. She could see them moving, extending the hands and then tapping the glass with one finger. The sound seemed eerie in the almost complete silence. Nicky couldn't take it anymore. Something totally insane was going on here, and she couldn't stand to even look at them. It was bad. They were bad. Every part of her mind howled in unison for her to turn and run. So she did. With a howl, Nicky whirled around and raced toward the gate. This place wasn't safe. No place would be. She reached the metal gate, grabbed hold of 2 bars, and pulled herself up. Behind her, the sound of fingers tapping against the glass got louder. Nicky scrambled to get up the gate as she tried to block out the noise of those things from her mind. It didn't help much. She pulled herself up, slipped, and would have fallen onto the spikes if not for her backpack. Nicky heard metal cutting into fabric as she grabbed hold of the other side of the bars, pushed herself on and reached for one of the straps as she tumbled and almost fell down the other side. The sound of things tapping glass windows was everywhere now. She looked up and could see them standing in the buildings, hitting the insides of their panes with their fingers. The noise they made shot through Nicky's bones. She ran, grabbed the bike by its handlebars, almost jumped onto it and started kicking the pedals hard. Everywhere they stood, in every building, behind every window. They all looked at her as she raced by, their eyes following her every move. Nicky could feel it in her bones. This was the catastrophe. The end of the world. The incessant sound of them tapping the windows grew more and more shrill in her ears. No place would be safe, and they all knew where she was. No, that wasn't true either. There was one spot where she hadn't seen them. Her apartment. Nicky turned the corner on her bike and almost crashed into a parked car, then screamed in shock as she saw a dark figure inside it, tapping the windshield as she drove by. Everywhere. You asked for this. The words repeated in her mind as tears shot into her eyes. She cried out into the noise as she raced through the abandoned city. It wasn't empty anymore. Nicky rounded the last corner on her bike and could see the apartment complex at her side. Anxiously, she looked up. The windows from her parents' apartment were empty. With another scream, Nicky hopped off the bike and ran toward the entrance of the complex. She didn't care anymore about anything. The sound of fingers tapping glass reverberated in her head. Would they come for her? There wasn't much she could do about it if they did. Then why was she back here? Nicky couldn't give a straight answer as she pushed open the door and ran into the darkness. Even in here, she could hear them. Tapping, tapping, tapping. It was driving her mad, but she kept on running. Up the stairs, one flight after another. She needed to go somewhere she felt safe. At least a tiny bit. A place where those things wouldn't be. Nicky felt her legs turning, but didn't stop. She jumped up the last flight of stairs while trying not to listen to the noise of the things tapping the glass throughout the complex. Up ahead was her parents' apartment, the one place where she would be safe. She ran through the hallway toward the door. The noise around her was almost deafening by now. Nicky pulled out the key, pushed it into the lock, and heard it click. She would be safe. Just a few more seconds. Nicky pulled open the door and froze. Her scream got stuck in her throat as she continued to look up and could see two of those shadowy figures standing inside her parents' apartment. A hand reached out to her as the world began spinning around her. She wanted to scream, to run, to howl, but her body didn't listen to her anymore. All she could concentrate on was the dark hand slowly coming toward her. Nicky howled in her mind as she felt her legs disappear and collapse to the floor. Darkness swallowed her completely. The only thing that remained was that tapping sound still ringing in her ears. Honey? It's time to wake up. Someone grabbed her by the shoulder and softly shook her awake. Nicky growled, then realized where she was and opened her eyes. Mom was standing by her bed, smiling. She almost jumped off the mattress and pulled her mother into a hug. Did you have bad dreams? She didn't answer. Her mother's voice sounded so far away. Nicky could see it in the corner of her room. The backpack, already packed, had a giant tear down the front. Her whole body seemed to freeze again. In the background noise of cars passing by, she could now hear it. The tap, tap, tap of countless fingers hitting the glass panes of the windows all around the city.